Welcome to Dimensions in Chumash by Rabbi Immanuel Bernstein, part of our collective Journeys in Torah. Welcome to Dimensions in Chumash. I'm Steve Geller. The final 5 parshios of the book of Shmos are devoted mainly to details of the Mishkan and the Big Day Kahuna, the priestly garments. But this narrative is paused in the middle to discuss the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf. The basic map of these parshios is as follows. You have Terumah, which talks about the Mishkan and its vessels. Then you have Tetzaveh, the command of the Big Day Kahuna. Then in Kisisa, we have the Chet HaEgel. In Vayakel, we have the construction of the Mishkan. And Pekudei, we have the making of the Big Day Kahuna. Rashi tells us that although the Chet HaEgel is written in the Torah after commandments regarding the Mishkan, it actually occurred before. Rashi is invoking the principle of Ein Mukdam U'Me'uchar B'Torah. There is no earlier or later in the Torah. In other words, the order in which events are written in the Torah does not necessarily reflect the order in which they occurred chronologically. This concept is obviously counterintuitive. The Torah relates so many events in addition to all the laws. When we read about events, we're accustomed to putting them in a linear perspective. So where does this concept that things don't happen in the order that they're expressed come from? The idea that an event which happened earlier in history can be written later in the Torah is discussed in the Gemara based on an episode where the Torah itself explicitly states that this was the case. The opening chapter of Chumash Bamidbar deals with the counting of Bnei Israel, which the Pasuk describes as having happened in the 2nd month of the 2nd year. But chapter 9 of Bamidbar discusses the Karban Pesach that was offered in the wilderness, specifying that this instruction was given in the 1st month of the 2nd year. The Gemara cites these 2 psukim and concludes, from here we see that there is no earlier and later in the Torah. Ein mukdam u'me'uchar b'Torah. This principle is applied by Rashi several times throughout his commentary on the Torah, with our situation being a classic example. Although the Chet HaEgel is discussed in the middle, Parsha Kisisa, it occurred before the events discussed in the prior parshios of Terumah and Tetzaveh. Having seen the basis of the principle, we could now ask, why did Rashi mention it here? In other words, Rashi must have had reasons to conclude that the parshios of the Mishkan and the Chet HaEgel are not in chronological order. And what would that reason be? Rav Leib Heyman offers a fascinating suggestion. Rashi notes, prior to the Chet HaEgel, the avoda of karbonos were performed by Bechorim, the firstborn. The introduction of the Kohanim from the tribe of Levi specifically to perform the avoda was a result of the Chet HaEgel. Having said this, we note that the following parsha, Tetzaveh, already records the command to initiate Aaron and his sons into the avoda. This is obviously an event that didn't happen until after the Egel. This, says Rav Heyman, is what led Rashi to conclude that these parshios were not written in chronological order. It's just a brilliant point from Rav Heyman. So having discussed the circumstances which might lead us to invoke the principle of Ein Mukdam U'Me'uchar B'Torah, shouldn't we take a step back for a moment and ask one obvious question? Why does the Torah present events out of their chronological order at all? What's the benefit in doing so? Rabbi Bernstein presents us with 2 approaches to this question. The general approach, the Sefer HaChinuch writes that in addition to teaching us how to perform mitzvos, the Torah includes and alludes to all forms of wisdom which can be taught to us in many different ways. The teaching of these other aspects of wisdom can result in the order of the parshios not reflecting the order in which they occurred. These additional deeper lessons may take precedence over presenting the chronological order. This is an incredible idea. We can also appreciate that it's one that potentially explains all cases where we see Ein Mukdam U'Me'uchar B'Torah in action. In all these cases, we can say that the Torah set aside the chronological order for the purposes of teaching some additional point of wisdom which required a different order. A more specific approach, from Rashi, episodes presented out of chronological order will reflect a concern relating to the topic itself. While discussing cases in Bamidbar which are out of order, counting people before the Karban Pesach, Rashi asks why. In fact, the Karban Pesach was not discussed first because it reflects negatively on Bnei Israel, since throughout all the 40 years they were in the wilderness, they only offered this holy Karban Pesach that one time. Based on this approach, we can ask, what is it about the Mishkan and the Chet HaEgel which would lead to them not being discussed in the order in which they occurred? We could answer simply that it's similar to the Karban Pesach case. The Torah would prefer to mention something positive, like the Mishkan, before something negative, like the Chet HaEgel. However, there may be a deeper point here. Let's look at a very unusual exchange from the Gemara in Brachos between Hashem and the people of Israel. Israel says, "Seeing as there is no forgetting before you, perhaps you will not forget the episode of the Egel." Hashem responds, "I will nevertheless forget the Egel." Israel then says, "Seeing as you are prepared to forget the Egel, perhaps you will also forget the events of Sinai." Hashem responds, "I will not forget Sinai." Well, what's this all about? How are the ideas of Hashem being prepared to forget the Egel and potentially forgetting Sinai linked to each other? More specifically, what is the meaning of Hashem forgetting either of these events, seeing as Hashem is all-knowing and does not forget anything? The Maharal explains that the Jewish people were most concerned with the fact that they could have made such a tragic mistake with the Egel so soon after receiving the Torah. They were afraid that it would create a disconnect between them and Hashem. And if that were the case, Hashem would never forget the Egel because it would always represent that terrible redefining moment of the relationship. To this, Hashem responded that he would forget the Egel, meaning he would not allow it to permanently diminish them. It would not represent their true nature. And the truth is, the Egel was not the product of any such disconnect. It was more of a result of the echoes of Egyptian culture which they had been exposed to for so many years and from which they had only recently been removed. So now, reassured by Hashem about the Egel, the concern of the Jewish people is now reversed. If their actions with the Egel during this formative period would be forgotten by Hashem, then perhaps their positive experiences at Sinai would not reflect positively on their true essence either. And if that were the case, they too were prone to be forgotten by Hashem. To this, Hashem responds that he would not forget Sinai, as the level attained by Israel at that time truly was an expression of their true nature. With the above in mind, we will appreciate the order of events as presented by the Torah in these parshios can express one of two truths: the truth about the order of events and the truth about the Jewish people. And now we can understand why the Torah reversed the order of events regarding the Mishkan and the Egel. Had it represented them in the order that they occurred, this may have been accurate regarding the events themselves, but would have misrepresented the truth about what these events say about the Jewish people. To present this larger point that Hashem will remember Har Sinai and forget the Egel, the positive topic of the Mishkan is presented first. The Jewish people have an essential connection with the divine presence represented by the Mishkan. Conversely, they have no such connection with the prior episode of the Egel, and why it may be true that those who don't learn from history are destined to repeat it, those who mislearn the lesson of history risk compromising their own destinies themselves. And once again, Rabbi Bernstein walks us right into a topic we may have known one or two sentences about and filled it in with meaningful color and detail. In this case, how the Torah's use of Ein Mukdam U'Meuchar B'Torah teaches us other deeper and profound lessons. And it's once again why you should like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit the share button to paste the link to this video into emails and texts to family and friends. It's the powerful mitzvah of Talmud Torah that brings us all together.